So let's get to the big three.
Number 3.
Regardless if Kamala decides to run for governor or if she decides to run for president, she is going to run and she will end up becoming the Democratic nominee for president.
Really? I can't wait for that. And by the way, that'll be the best news ever for Republicans looking for a leader. Kamala raised her hand and Walz can't stop talking. Should the Dems go back to the future as the truth about Joe Biden's past is finally emerging? We discussed the path the left seems to be taking.
Number 2.
Ever since Trump took office, that, God help these sanctuary cities, because Pam Bondi's going to be all over them, suing them. President Trump's going to take their federal funding away. Now we got Lena Hobbit taking on New Jersey. Sanctuary cities are sanctuaries for criminals.
It's true. Immigration fight accelerating on every level as we try to rid the American college campuses of foreign bad actors. Fight blue cities, sanctuary policies, and the courts who will try to go to bat for the illegals. We have it all.
Number 1.
Well, I think it's very close, but we have to have a deal that we like. We don't want a deal that's going to be a bad deal, or I could make every deal in one day if I wanted to.
And that is the President of the United States. The news this morning came out since he made those statements that China has upped the tariff fee to 125%, and they're going after certain companies, upping the pressure. China and the U.S. are going tiff for tariff, but who is holding the stronger hand? Why I say it's Trump, but we all have to show we have steel in our spine to help him win. Let's bring in the RNC chair, Michael Whatley. Michael, welcome back.
It's good to be on with you, sir.
So, Michael, since this whole Liberation Day happened April 7th, the president's approval rating has suffered. What does that tell you?
Well, I think right now that we are negotiating, we are working. The president is doing everything he can to move forward with an America First trade agenda. He has been saying since he came down the golden escalator in Trump Tower in 2015 that America needs to reset our trade relationships with the entire world, and the entire world is going to have to treat America fairly. That's what he's working on right now, and we've seen over the course of the last 2 weeks that every single country is coming to the table except for China, and that those are the discussions that we need to have to reset the world trade order and make it fair for America.
Listen to what Senator Elizabeth Warren had to say, cut 12.
Rhyme or reason to the numbers is just creating economic chaos. And when there's economic chaos, no one wants to make investments in the United States to build more manufacturing, to build more good jobs here in America.
Your thoughts?
As usual, Elizabeth Warren is wrong on every single point. What we have seen in terms of the economic recovery since President Trump won his election is that grocery prices have come down, inflation has come down, gasoline prices have come down. There's absolutely no economic chaos taking place whatsoever right now. We've had some volatility in the markets, but those are short term, and the stock market does not equate to the economy. The fact is we have seen trillions upon trillions of dollars in new investment that is coming to the United States. Over $5 trillion worth of announcements have been made by companies that are building new manufacturing or even moving manufacturing from offshore onto the United States right now. So the president's plan is absolutely working. And you have to look at tariffs as not just in a vacuum. You have to look at it as part of his overall plan to rebuild our manufacturing capacity here in the United States. And that means that we've got to have a tax structure that's going to be able to work for them, and we're working on that through Congress right now. It means you need regulatory relief, and we are seeing the departments and agencies all across the administration who are moving forward on a regulatory relief agenda, and we need the tariff discussions that are taking place right now, where we've got over 70 different countries have reached out to the United States in order to renegotiate on their tariffs.
Yeah, so, and we'll see, and we did have the trade rep, Jameson was on this morning, and he did say, Jameson Greer, that he's got calls today with Taiwan as well as Israel to start doing the maybe some of the easier ones and get that done. I want to talk about what we're hearing now with the big beautiful bill. Thomas Massie, should you just give up on him ever voting with Republicans if it has anything to do with spending?
Sir, certainly disappointing that he has been voting against the president and, frankly, against the American people's interests on these bills as we've been moving forward. Obviously, hope springs eternal, and we hope that at some point he will see that what we are doing is trying to advance the agenda that he says he supports. Look, the fact is, this is not just Donald Trump's agenda. It's the Republican agenda, and it's an American agenda that we need to move forward with rebuilding our economy, restoring our southern border, and making sure that America is strong enough to protect our interests and allies around the world.
What did you take away from the special elections in Florida?
I think that two things. One, the Democrats spent over $20 million to lose both races by double digits. And it shows you that the Republican brand continues to be very, very strong. And Florida, you've got to give that state a lot of credit. They have moved steadily to the right every single year. And those were rock solid wins for us. The other thing is it took our, majority in the House from 3 seats to 5, which given the narrow majorities that we've got and the narrow majorities that we're getting on these votes, absolutely critical to have both of those guys there. So, I think that that's a very good harbinger of where we're going into the midterm election cycle.
So Mike Lawler and Nancy Mace both might run for governors in their respective states. Those are tough. Well, especially in Mike Lawler's situation, that's a tough one for Republicans to win. Will you encourage them not to?
Well, I think right now, we're going to wait and see kind of what those primaries look like and what those candidates look like. I have a lot of respect for Mike Lawler and Nancy Mace. Both of them have been, working hand in glove with the leadership teams and with President Trump to move forward on his agenda. There's a lot more that you can do in these types of elections when you have forewarning, when you understand, throughout the cycle, we have time to go through a primary process. We go through the election process. What that's going to ultimately look like.
We see that Tim Walz is out there doing a lot of appearances, and now Kamala Harris is looking for a comeback. Your thoughts about both them as candidates? Here's what Evan Parker said, a Democratic campaign operative, Cut 27.
I think that there's a segment of Democrats right now that are still behind Kamala because I think Democrats have this tendency to go along with whose turn is it next, right? They don't actually want the Democratic voters to pick their own candidates, as evidenced with Bernie in 2016 and 2020, and then again in 2024 when she was handed the candidacy on a silver platter. So I think what will happen, and I'm making this prediction now, is that regardless if Kamala decides to run for governor or if she decides to run for president, she is going to run and she will end up becoming the Democratic nominee for president.
What are your thoughts if Evan Parker is right?
Well, look, I mean, both Kamala Harris and Tim Walz were terrible messengers last cycle. They also were preaching a terrible message that was not received well by the American people. And if they are going to be candidates going forward, everything we're hearing in the last couple of weeks from both of them is that they are doubling down on the failed agenda. They're saying that we didn't advocate strongly enough, that we didn't have enough time to go out there. The fact is the American people did not want what they were campaigning on. The American people do not want open borders. They don't want inflationary spending. They do not want men and women's locker room and a woke ideology that was the cornerstone of their candidacy. So if they're just going to go in and double down on those positions, which is what they're telling us over the last couple of weeks they're going to do, it's not going to work with the American people. So, candidly, as the RNC chair, I would welcome either one of those at the top of the ticket.
So you'd be into that?
Yeah, I think I would. Look, the fact is the American people have made it very clear they want a strong America. They want us to have strong borders. They want us to have a strong economy, and they want us to have a strong standing around the world. And that is absolutely 180 degrees from where Tim Walz and Kamala Harris were running last cycle.
Do you get worried about the size of the crowds that Bernie Sanders and AOC are getting?
I don't. I think that there clearly are a lot of folks that they're paying, that they're moving around, that are going to, be interested in showing up at those rallies. But the fact is the American people voted, and they voted in every single battleground state, and they voted in the popular vote for President Trump because they want America to move in a totally different direction.
He is Michael Whatley's got his hands full. Michael, right now, do you think it's harder to help get President Trump elected, or is it going to be harder to keep the House?
Well, right now, I think that the House majority of 5 seats is something that we're going to be working on every single day throughout the course of this midterm cycle. We need to expand that majority. And President Trump is a singular political force in America. And he worked every single day around the principles of his campaign, which, were to rebuild the economy and restore the border and make America strong again. That worked very hard. What we're going to have to do is win these midterm elections without him on the ticket, which means that we've got to turn Trump voters into Republican voters. And in order to do that, Congress is going to have to do its work and pass this reconciliation bill. They're going to have to pass the big, beautiful bill, extend the Trump tax credits, make sure that we have no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security, and that we have permanent solutions for border security and American energy. And when they get that done, we're going to feel very good about what's going to happen with our economy, what's going to happen around the world, and we're going to be in a strong position going into the midterm.
Is there something big after the big, beautiful bill, which they say should pass this summer if it's going to pass?
Well, it absolutely needs to pass, and then we're going to look at other parts of the agenda that we're going to move forward. What we learned when we switched from President Trump to Joe Biden was that through executive orders, they can be wiped out. And so despite the fact that we had America on a very strong standing in 2020 around the world and with the southern border and our economy was recovering, Joe Biden wiped all of that out with a stroke of a pen. We want to get legislation in place to make sure that this agenda is going to be put in place permanently.
All right. Thanks so much, Michael. Have a great weekend.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Brian.
All right, your turn, 1-866-408-7669. So we got up to the news that China has upped their tariffs to 125%. We're at 145%. They've also selling American debt, and they're also doing this. They are they have targeted companies, 12 U.S. firms to export control, restricting what they can ship out of China, and adding 6 defense tech aviation firms to the so-called unreliable entity list. So they think they have a game plan. They think they have a toolkit, setting up blacklists and other things. We'll see where that goes because I'm not sure that China's got as strong a hand as you would think. I know they want to act tough, but when we come back, why they're really not that tough. Don't move. You're listening to the Brian Kilmeade Show.
I'm pretty frustrated as an investor because the classic situation for small business and entrepreneurial investing is you find a product or service in America, you prove it in the American market to a run rate of $5 million a year on Amazon, and bang, it's ripped off in China. There's nothing you can do. You can't go appeal to WTO. It's deaf ears there. You can't litigate because we don't have access to their courts, even though they have access to ours. Not only that, they have access to our capital markets. We let them list companies here. So I have to compete with a Chinese company that is not compliant with GAAP, that completely ignore the regulator, raise money when I have to compete on a basis where I have to be compliant, spend millions of dollars in compliance, and make sure that the SEC and all the other regulatory bodies are okay with my issuance, but not the Chinese.
Obviously, that's Kevin O'Leary. He is fed up. He's got multiple companies dealing with China all the time. He is for upping the tariffs to 400% to change this relationship. Now, I don't know if that's practical. Larry Kudlow, I'm not sure how into tariffs you were when you were in your days at CNBC, but now you understand that presidents use it as a tactic, and you have a 4-year, when you were there, 4 years to look at how successful he's been and where this is heading. Larry Kudlow, host of Kudlow on FBN at 4 o'clock, and former assistant to President Trump, joins us now. Larry, welcome back.
Thanks, Brian. I was part of the negotiating team with China in 2018 and 2019, where we tried to hammer out a deal on purchases of commodities and stopping intellectual property theft, stopping the forced transfer of technology, and allowing American companies to do business in China, companies that Americans owned, that the board was better than 50%. And we came up with the so-called phase one trade deal, signed it with much ballyhoo in January of 2020. So the virus had already started, and the Chinese were covering that up. But I want to say that they did not adhere to any part of that phase one trade deal. We never got the commodities. They're still stealing intellectual property. They're still forcing technology transfers. In most cases, they don't allow American companies to own themselves, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't, you've got China is run by Xi Jinping. Friends of mine who have good contacts and do a lot of business in China and visiting there and coming back telling me that Xi has made himself so powerful. He's virtually an emperor. All right, it's a communist state, yes, but it's worse than that. He's made himself an emperor. He's knocking off his opponents, and that's why anyone who expects real changes from China is, I think, at this stage just wrong. And I think Trump is exactly right to slam them. And think of it this way. You've got it's 145% tariff now on China.
Yep.
Basically, we are their customer, okay? Their model is very simple. Government subsidies produce cheap goods at low wages, and they sell them to the United States. This tariff will take away China's biggest customer, that is to say us, and will do enormous damage to a Chinese economy that is already nearly imploding because of a long-term real estate bubble. So Xi Jinping has made enormous mistakes with retaliation. Trump has outfoxed him. And one other point, Brian Kilmeade, I make, the countries around China are become American allies. Okay, Vietnam, a communist country, wants to do business with us. Taiwan, South Korea, India, Malaysia, one after another, have deserted China and have come to the United States to do business. So, again, Xi has made a monumental mistake.
Well, he's going right now today through Southeast Asia to try to shore up relationships with those countries. And there's a couple things, Larry. Do you think when the president said, okay, Liberation Day, 10% tariffs across the country, is that beginning to get our allies angry at us? No. It was a shock and awe announcement, all right? And the numbers on those tariff charges were way out of line. But leaving that aside, no, because look what's happened. 75 or so countries have come to us, not to China, and they want to do business. And, now Scott Bessent and Jameson Career. Jameson was on Fox and Friends, and he talked about Vietnam, Taiwan, and Israel. Japan is going to be perhaps the first major deal that might even be a template that Bessent is working on. These countries want to do business with us. The European Union, which started out, saying, oh, we're going to retaliate. No, they've now pulled back, and they're talking about, a 0-0 goods deal, which is insufficient because of their non-tariff barriers. But the point is, in a sense, Trump's strategy worked. It worked because the U.S. is the most powerful market, the most powerful economy, and they have to do business with us. And you'll see a string of deals. I mean, the sooner the better. I'm hoping to get a deal soon. That'll change, the attitude in the stock market, too, which is very bearish right now, but I think that can be changed with a deal. Very important. And Scott Bessent has been put in as the lead guy, the Treasury Secretary. He's a friend of mine. I pushed him hard for that position. Told Trump, no, not me. Go for Scott. Scott is going to put some order into this, some diplomacy into this, and some strategy into this. And I think they're on their way. I know the markets are roiling. I get that. The dollar is weak. Gold is strong. Stocks are weak. I get all that. But I think you'll see much better outlook once they start doing deals. So Larry Kudlow, our guest, obviously. So Charlie, Larry, Charlie Gasparino was saying the bond market was the thing that forced Trump's hand. Is that right?
Well, there was some congestion in the bond market, but I wouldn't give it all that. I've talked to Charlie about it. He's a terribly smart guy, and he's a friend. The answer is yes, but the stock market was the biggest issue. And, Bessent basically, I think, advised Trump to, take a more positive outlook on negotiations. That happened last Sunday. And Trump put Bessent in charge of the whole thing. And remember, too, the strategy had to change because all these countries are coming to us. The phone was ringing off the hook. And, we can't be going out bashing all these countries because they want to do business with us. They want to make a deal with us. And so I think it was a combination of all those events.
So a couple of things. China's targeted 12 U.S. firms to an export control list this week, restricting what they can ship to China. They've also honed their toolkit in looking at they announced an antitrust investigation into chemical giant DuPont. They also looking at probes into blue chip American companies like Google and NVIDIA. So this is all aggression. So we could start delisting a lot of their companies. Do you think that would be a problem, getting them off our list? Was this way to get them out of our stock exchange?
I'd love to see it. Honestly, I'd love to see it. In Trump's first term, Robert O'Brien, the National Security Advisor, and I we delisted all Chinese companies from the federal thrift savings plan, which is a very big deal. It's a huge savings plan. And we took those companies out. And by the way, the clip you played from Kevin, they don't abide by our accounting standards anyway. So you don't even know what you're buying. But we took them out of the thrift savings plan. If you want to delist them from our stock markets, I am all for it. Absolutely. They shouldn't be here in the first place.
And so we'll see what's gonna happen on these trade deals. A couple other things. Number one, when it comes to Amazon, their CEO made a lot of news yesterday and said, we're going to notice, the customers are going to notice all prices are going up. All right, call me naive, but Amazon has 2/3 of their products are from China. I mean, why don't they have a responsibility at some point to understand the companies and the countries they're working with? Because a lot of those products are knockoff of American products. So they just list them to make money. Maybe they should be a little bit responsible.
Yes, you're right. They're going to have to change their business plan. One way or another, they're going to have to change their business plan. They should have done it years ago, okay? They should have done it years. Tim Cook has been working for years to change the Apple business plan. Amazon's got to do exactly the same thing because it's going to be hard to sell these goods with 145% tariff, at least at wholesale. They're going to get clobbered if they, bring them back here to the U.S. So they're going to have to change their business model.
So I want you to hear this. Isaac Larian is the MGA Entertainment CEO. By the way, they're starting to restrict our movies there, and said this on Fox Business, your favorite network. Cut 15.
My head is spinning because every day there is a new tariff. There was 0 tariffs on toys before this, and now it's 145%. And to be honest with you, I blame a guy named Peter Navarro. He is, my nickname for him is an economic terrorist. He's no different than the Islamic regime in Iran that says death to America. He wrote a book called Death to China 20 years ago. He has 0 experience in manufacturing.
You know the inner workings there. Scott Bessent has been pushed up and made a lot of people in Wall Street feel better. You've worked with Peter. I mean, do you feel as though he's in the right position to help Donald Trump?
Look, Peter's very aggressive. He's a hardliner. Okay, no question about it. I don't think he's been effective, but nonetheless, to call him a terrorist is just crazy because he's basically, following Trump's orders. Peter lacks some flexibility, but I'm not here to bash Peter Navarro. The point is, a lot of American companies are going to have to change their business model. They're going to have to change their supply chain models. It does cause a certain amount of turbulence, but it can be done. And here's another thing. These Asian countries, Brian, just take Vietnam again. I think it's the most extraordinary story with our history with Vietnam, which is, in some ways it's a tragic history. But now the communist government wants to be an ally. They hate China, okay, and they want to do business with us. Vietnam can make these products. It's not China transshipping. It's Vietnam factories open making these products. The same thing is true in Malaysia, for example, and Cambodia. It's a little smaller, but still, Vietnam's the biggest of that group. The same thing is true in India. We will be changing supply chains with these and go and do business with these other Asian countries. We don't need China. Their factories in Vietnam and so forth are producing. They're producing all kinds of goods, and we'll work out tariff differences and we'll work out regulatory differences, and there's no reason why the business can't move to them.
I just want to give you these stats and tell me if they hold up. One economist over at Cornell says 73% of our smartphones, 78% of our laptops, 87% of our video game consoles, 77% of our toys are made in China. If those numbers hold up, man, we're going to feel this. Larry, do you agree with those numbers?
I don't know the numbers specifically, but I know that, things like iPhones, and yes, a lot of that's coming out of China. It won't be all that hard. It may take 6 to 12 months, but again, those supply chains can be completely changed and move away from China. This stuff's not hard to make. It's just, it's not like it's high-class advanced technology. You're talking about commodities, basically, that can be knocked off almost anywhere, and that's what's going to happen. So I agree. Look, the numbers here, people talking about a recession in the United States. So I did back of the envelope. The first charge, tariff, the reciprocal tariff charge, came to about $700 billion. It was based on a very bad formula. It had way too high tariffs, but that was the first number. That's over 2% of our GDP. GDP in this country is about $28 trillion. $700 billion is a little over 2%. That's a problem. That'd be a problem because it'd be like a gigantic tax hike. However, now that Trump has put his negotiating hat on, the art of the deal hat, you're never going to see those tariffs. They just won't happen. My best guess right now is the 10% baseline tariff is probably the best numbers to work off. That's about $300 billion. That's about 1% of GDP. We can take that hit. Now, consumers may have much less than that because the tariffs are put wholesale, and as it moves to retail, usually chops off a quarter or a half, but whatever the details may be. Think of it this way. The tax cuts that are working through Congress, and, the House passed this budget resolution, very important. Those tax cuts, not only the extension, but the new ones, like tax-free overtime pay, those are about $5 trillion of stimulus, Brian. And then your deregulatory program
it's going to be huge.
Is worth about $1.5 trillion. So you got a lot of economists with what I call single entry bookkeeping. They're only obsessed with the tariffs. They forget about the tax cuts. By the way, you see oil's coming down substantially. Gasoline at the pump retail is going to be much lower. The wholesale price index, the PPI, fell
real quick,
in March. The CPI fell in March. In other words, the story is complicated, okay, I get that, but I think in a macro sense, it's not going to be near as bad, and it's going to wind up being very good and productive.
And Larry Kudlow has just showed everyone why he's got the #1 show in business television. He's going to be at 4 o'clock today. Larry, thanks so much. Our audience thanks you as well. Have a great show.
Anytime, Brian. Thank you.
Back in a moment. Ian Pryor joins us now to talk about the other big story, and that's immigration, and education. But Ian is author of Parents of the World Unite, senior advisor at American First Legal, executive director of the Fight for Schools. Ian, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
Ian, if I can tap into your other knowledge, and that is just a little bit from schools for a second, and that is what Mahmoud Khalil is going to be in a courtroom today, at which time the State Department's got to present their information about his background and where his organizations might be in violation of his green card status that might link right back to Hamas. How much information do you think the State Department has, and how much do they need to present?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think if they're bringing this case, certainly they have the goods in order to get there in court and hopefully succeed. As for what they need, I mean, look, there's a big question here, and you see a lot of it from the left where they talk about the First Amendment and this individual's First Amendment rights are being trampled upon. Well, no, you really need to understand that the First Amendment does not give you carte blanche to engage in conduct and activities that may be threatening or intimidating, et cetera. Because if the First Amendment was carte blanche to, say, engage in a conspiracy, then we would never be able to prosecute conspiracy, right? So there's an exception to the general law with respect to the First Amendment that speech, which is integral to the commission of a crime, is not protected by the First Amendment. So that's one of the interesting things I see about sort of this case, where the pushback is based on the First. Look, if this individual is tied to Hamas, if he is conspiring with Hamas for whatever reason to intimidate, to harass, whether it's students on campus or in any other walk of life, then that is criminal. So, it is important to find out what the associations are, because that will ultimately help establish that this is not somebody who is just engaging in speech. This is someone who is engaging in conduct, and that speech is a method to perpetrate illegal conduct. I
mean, he was doing the negotiations in the Columbia last year for the students. He was pushing to divest from Israel. How much does it matter? Hey, I'm pulling for the Palestinians over Israelis. How much do you have to prove that he was with the Hamas, the terrorists, as opposed to, somebody that would be on the side of Ukraine and Russia? Do you follow me?
Yeah, well, you're going to have to be able to establish a link so that you have this material support, right? And we've seen these kind of cases throughout certainly the last Trump administration when I was at DOJ. How does he cross the line?
Yeah.
It may be, that he's advocating for, the Palestinians, or is what he is doing really providing support for, Hamas and what is going on in Israel. And we're talking about divestment. That's another thing that is geared towards really harming Israel and harming that region. So I think that it's going to be interesting to see just what they have and the elements of proof that they're going to be able to meet with it.
Just so you know, a 2-page memo was released by the State Department ahead of the hearing, revealing that they're hoping to deport Khalil based on a rarely used immigration law that lets the Secretary of State remove anyone whose presence might be a threat to U.S. foreign policy. Participating in anti-Semitic protests, disruptive activities, which fosters a hostile environment for Jewish students, is what they're going with. I hope that's enough, because if it's enough, Ian, then we can get rid of these other ungrateful insurrectionists that we're allowing taking up American kids' spots in elite colleges.
Well, yeah, and what's interesting is sort of this link that from the immigration perspective, where we're talking about it was the Alien Act from the John Adams presidency, right? Well, that had to do with what was going on in America with the French, right? And the French were coming in here and creating all kinds of issues that were trying to essentially drag the United States into war. So we've seen this before, certainly 200 plus years ago. But that's what we're seeing here as well, is people using the United States to really engage in bad behavior, and in this case, with respect to issues overseas, right? And to try and recruit people, whether it's not recruit people necessarily to go over there and fight, but certainly emotionally and condition people and sort of get them on the side of the terrorists, which is what we're seeing here, and that kind of thing destabilizes our foreign policy.
So I want to bring you to something else. So this MS-13 guy, that's what a judge said in 2019, living in Maryland, was put on a plane and shipped to El Salvador. And they say, well, he shouldn't have been shipped to El Salvador. The Justice Department said, we made a mistake there. But this guy was told thought to be by a judge in 2019, linked with MS-13. Now, whether he became a state's witness against MS-13 and therefore made him, like, almost if you turn on the mob, somebody who's whose security is going to be threatened. I understand it. His name is Kilmar Abrego Garcia. So now it seems that the ruling came out and a U.S. judge ordered that the government has to try to facilitate him coming back here. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah,
and the Supreme Court ordered it.
Obviously, yeah, the Supreme Court ordered it, and it's a little digested the decision. But my understanding is it's not as clear-cut as you need to bring him back, right? It goes back down to the lower court to understand what effectuate means, right? And I think that's sort of the question. Is it does the United States have to go and formally force him to come back, or is it they have to negotiate or make any attempts to do so? You know, it's a little bit confusing from the district court's order, and I think that's what the Supreme Court is getting at. I mean, I do think the upshot is they're saying, yeah, you have to figure out a way to potentially see if there's a method to bring him back because he didn't get, whatever process he was due under the statute. But it's a little unclear, and I think it's going to have to go back down to the district court for, more proceedings and hearings as to what exactly the court expects the administration to do.
It was weird. I mean, I have so many different interpretations of what they said, and it was Sotomayor and Justice Kagan said, I would have declined to intervene in the litigation and denied the application in full. Nevertheless, I agree with the court's order that the proper remedy is to provide Garcia with all the process to which he would have been entitled to had he not been unlawfully removed to El Salvador. Now, the question is, to a bigger picture, Ian Pryor, is they now have ruled that you can deport these would-be gangsters out of our country. Got it. But they said they have to have their due process. They're here illegally. They've committed a crime that's been stated, whether it's from ICE or from local law enforcement. Are we going to put them in the same system as if Brian Kilmeade and Ian Pryor had a crime? And that means they're going to wait for years to have their day in court, and that's going to cost us more money? And then we're going to get him a lawyer?
I certainly hope not. And I certainly hope that to the extent there is that's what we're looking at here. There's a difference between what happened with this individual from Maryland versus some of the other individuals that have been deported, right, and sent to, different countries. With the difference being, well, all right, look, if we're saying that this was a mistake here, if that's sort of the dividing line, okay, but if we're saying that every single person that is either here illegally or has committed vicious crimes cannot be deported without some long due process, well, I think that's obviously a problem. So we're going to have to see where the courts come down on those sort of refined points to what these rulings come out with.
So it's pretty extraordinary in that if we have to put him in our system and we have to provide an attorney for them, the question is, for smart guys like you, is do they get the same rights we have? They came into our country illegally. They're alleged to have made a crime, and now we got to give them all the processes. What criminal wouldn't want to come here? They got a much better shot. Not only if the right administration will never be arrested, now you got the wrong administration for criminals, but then you get your process. You get a free attorney. What's better than this?
Yeah, well, I think the difference being in this situation is the process is deemed by statute and administrative code as opposed to, the Constitution, right? But that doesn't, just depending on that statutory scheme, which of course is just like every other statutory scheme, convoluted, thousands of pages long. Like it could ultimately end up being the same sort of rights that we would have due to American citizens. So, that when we talk about immigration law, I mean, what the president has done has been phenomenal. Because you go back to Biden and Kamala saying, well, we needed to pass this bill. Well, I guess we didn't, certainly to make the border secure. But now we have to deal with sort of what's been going on in the interior. And that might be a little bit more complicated than securing the border. So I think that's where we're going to have to start seeing some actual legislation that helps support the president's agenda to make sure that we're able to deal with, part two, which is part one, secure the border. Part two, deal with what's here already because of the lack of the secure border that we've had for so many years.
Tap into education for a second. About 19 different states do not want to comply with the administration's executive order to stop practicing DEI in your schools. They don't want to comply. So the federal government wants to hold back money. And they'll try to. And then, of course, these different cities and jurisdictions will sue back. How does this play out? I know what you want to see play out. I know you. But how does it play out legally?
Well, that's what. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. You're going to see these schools, whether it's DEI, whether it's boys and girls sports, they are going to push back, right? And what's going to happen is they're going to end up suing in pick your jurisdiction, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, right? A favorable jurisdiction, and say that the government is breaching its contract. They get a good court ruling. It goes up on appeal. It's going to have to go to the Supreme Court. And look, if it gets to the Supreme Court, I think the administration is absolutely going to win. I mean, this is the Harvard case. But what we've seen from these school districts is they are recalcitrant. They are not going to do what is legal, or they're going to keep doing what's illegal until there's a court order telling them specifically you can't do it. It's not enough for, a Supreme Court ruling that, covers it and covers it broadly and says you cannot do this. No, these school districts, they won't do anything until there's a court order telling them they have to do it.
And it depends on the judges, and they're going to keep going up the line, and everything's going to end up at the Supreme Court?
Well, it could, and it depends on where you go, right? So there are some states where, maybe you get a district court and you get a more liberal district judge, but then you pull a good panel on the Federal Court of Appeals and the administration wins. Maybe you get a win at the appellate court, and maybe the school districts don't want to challenge it to the Supreme Court because that establishes nationwide precedent.
There's so much going on, and then the girls and women's sports. Lastly, I think it's Maine, where the governor stood up and said, "Hey, you know what? I don't care if a trans man goes against girls' sports," and the president famously sparred with her. But now the governor's going to have funds withheld until she complies. And how does that play out?
Yeah, well, I think that in those situations, they're going to have to make choices, right? When we're talking about federal funds, certainly that's higher education, but you also have it K through 12. And what a lot of those federal funds go to are schools in sort of poorer areas where they actually need federal funds. So, these places are going to have to ask themselves, is this the hill to die on, right? Are we going to take away opportunities? These are federal funds, not just for sports, right?
Yes.
These are federal funds for everything. So are we going to take away opportunities for other students because we want to have men competing in female athletics? Right? Is that what they want to do? Because that is a 90-10, 80-20 issue in this country. And I think when push comes to shove, when those federal funds start drying up, and especially when you talk about higher education, right? Because higher education, it gets even more interesting because federal funds are student loans, right? So if you don't get federal funds, that means you get no student loans. All of that factors into it.
Gotcha.
And certain federal grants can't be used for those schools.
And
there's a lot of pressure.
It's just like lazy thought. I want rights for everybody. Well, they don't understand that rights are being taken away in this situation because of that. And the big retort was, it rarely ever happens. Yeah, of course but it keeps happening over and over again. And if you're a kid that gets steamrolled or robbed from a scholarship or a place on a podium, despite their talent and their dedication, I think it'll be a little bit too personal to avoid. Ian Pryor, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
What really worries me about Iran's nuclear program is that it's married up to a missile program. So if they got nuclear weapons, they wouldn't just be able to attack our friends in Israel or in the Arab world. They could strike the United States in just a matter of a few years, much like North Korea can now as well. So I don't think there's enough focus on the imminent threat that Iran's nuclear program poses, not just to our friends in the Middle East, but to the United States itself.
And that is why time is not on their side, and it's not on our side either. We shouldn't let them rebuild their missile defense that Israel took out. We shouldn't let Hezbollah and Hamas have some time to rebuild in any way, shape, or form, even though Hamas is under tremendous pressure right now. And then we find out this report that says that Iran is basically capable in a month of building maybe 8 nuclear weapons, and there's been no limitation on their missile, their intercontinental missile progress, and some of their intellectual ability that they've improved on, and that was not even in the last agreement that Trump abrogated. Let's bring in General Rob Spalding. He's a U.S. Air Force Brigadier General. General, great to have you. Your thoughts about the stakes in Oman beginning Saturday?
Well, I mean, the whole region is kind of waiting with bated breath to see how these Iranian negotiations are going to go. Quite frankly, I think the forces that the U.S. have arrayed have the capacity to take out the nuclear industrial base that Iran has developed, and so I think one way or the other we're going to get rid of the threat.
So they say from what they've put together now, they say in 1 month, 10 weapons, in 2 months, 12 to 13 weapons. So when they see their enrichment capability and what they believe they have the intellectual capacity to put together. And if we know this, Israel knows this, and Israel has got the objective. They've done it in the past. They've ignored us in the past, Reagan and Bush, and taken out nuclear programs themselves in Iraq and Syria. Is there any reason to think that if these talks look like they're dragging on, they won't take action?
No, I mean, I would expect them to. I'm surprised that we've allowed it to get as far as it has, to get to the level of enrichment that they have, and to build, the as much, infrastructure as they've built. I mean, the thing about nuclear weapons, they're not technically hard to build. It's just takes a massive industrial effort to enrich the uranium, and that is easy to take out because all those centrifuges have to be in very controlled environments, and so I think the task of taking it out is not hard, and I wonder why we've let it go on so long.
Yeah, no kidding. We know this. Iran has got money because China is now buying 90% of their oil from China. From Iran. So they've just said, the hell with this. Let's let everybody know it. We're just ignoring any type of sanctions. We're just going to go try to help sustain their economy, let alone with the money they get from Russia for the drones that they're getting to kind of shape the battlefield in Ukraine.
No, that's absolutely true, and it's crazy because it goes to show you how just unbalanced we are, because it's not just what's going on in Iran. If you look at Ukraine, for example, while we've been funding the Ukrainians, we've also been funding the Russians through China. So in a sense, we're doing the same thing. We're giving money to Israel, and then we're giving money to the Iranians through China. They always happen to be the place that both Russia and Iran and North Korea are getting their funding from, because they've connected their economies together.
What do you mean by how? What role are we playing?
Well, so every time you buy something from China, that's revenue that's going to China that can be then pushed to Russia. And so by creating this ecosystem and economic ties between, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, by virtue of being connected to the global trading system and being so interconnected with our economy, that trade deficit that we have with China, it goes to fund these problems, whether it be North Korea, Russia, or Iran.
Here is what General Keane told me this morning about an hour ago, cut 38.
Iran has become somewhat defenseless. No longer do they have Hezbollah and Hamas to the degree they did. They don't have Syria as their strategic platform. Their air defense systems have been destroyed by Israel. Much of their rockets and missiles destroyed by Israel as well. And Iran has been deterred. They have not reattacked, even though they promised they would. So they're in a very difficult situation, to say the least. And that brings up the way they want to preserve their regime. The reason they've always wanted that weapon is for that reason. And now they need it more than ever. So we shouldn't be surprised that they're moving closer to it.
So and he also looks at this as a window because this has been a 40-year foe, and the whole region's been basically against Iran right now. And they lost their ally in Syria. They lost Hezbollah. They lost Hamas. The Houthi rebels are left, and they say they're the least controllable out of all of them, and we've hit them for 16 straight days.
No, I think that's right. It's the same reason the North Koreans have gone for nuclear weapons. It's the same reason, quite frankly, that Ukraine wishes they hadn't given up theirs. And so, no, I totally agree with what he said. I would just say, add the one thing that without that financial support from the Chinese, from buying their oil, they would really be in trouble.
Right, and we'll see what happens. The longer we wait, how soon do they form a formal alliance saying the attack on one is attack on all? And then we're going to be in a really tough situation. So that's why this window's open. And the president said flat out, if these talks don't work out, military option is an option. If something like that would be to happen, what is more likely, us to do it or for Israel to do it with our weapons?
No, I mean, I think it would be us. I think the forces arrayed without going into exactly how it's going to happen. The forces that they have in the region are have been training for this.
And we do have another aircraft carrier in the region. Do you think the whole region understands what that means?
I definitely think they do. With all the talk on B-2s on Diego Garcia, I think everybody's very clear-eyed about what's going to happen if we don't have good negotiations.
General Spalding, I want you to hear this. This came out of testimony yesterday about what we're up against when it comes to China and where we're falling short. Cut 43.
And they are producing fighters at a rate of 1.2 to 1 over the United States. Furthermore, their advanced air-to-air missile, long-range air-to-air missiles, also present a tremendous threat. The United States of America enjoys key advantages in space, counterspace, command and control between the Kármán line and the surface, and undersea dominance. But that margin is shrinking, and we must regain the margin and increase the margin. And that ability to fight and win is what will make sure that our adversaries do not execute any aggression to do so.
So those numbers are indisputable, and I don't know, is it possible for it to expand our industrial base to match it?
I don't know that. So first of all, we have to expand our industrial base, period. What we did over the last 40 years was just absolute insanity. We have to bring back manufacturing. I hope it's to the tune of tens of thousands of facilities, because that ends up being the forge that any war in the future is going to be supplied by. That being said, the approach we took with the Soviet Union, I think in the case of China, is the right approach, and that is massive retaliation from nuclear weapons is what's going to keep a war from happening. Because once a war happens, there is no way to tell when or if or how you prevent it from escalating to the nuclear level. And so what we have to do is be prepared for nuclear war and then use that as a means to prevent actual conflict between, Russia, China, or the United States, or else we're looking at, potentially the end of mankind.
So we're looking at some of what was going on over Taiwan over the last few, I guess, years, but mostly over the last month or so about their invasion, some of the rehearsals. The Admiral was asked about this near Taiwan. Cut 44.
Indo-PACOM faces a confluence of challenges. China's unprecedented aggression and military modernization poses a serious threat to the homeland, our allies, and our partners. In 2024, the People's Liberation Army demonstrated growing capabilities through persistent pressure operations, with military pressure against Taiwan increasing by 300%. China's increasingly aggressive actions near Taiwan are not just exercises, they are rehearsals.
And have we rehearsed how we'd respond?
Well, I've been the red team because of all my time in China on these Title X war games, and I can tell you we don't win them. And quite frankly, to be honest, we won't even get forces to the region before the Chinese have control of Taiwan. That's just the truth. And the only way to, in my opinion, to prevent war and prevent the Chinese from taking Taiwan would be to introduce nuclear weapons into Taiwan, which I doubt we're going to do. So I've taken the position that Taiwan is going to go over to China at some point. It's just when they decide to do it. And I think the thing that we need to be concerned about is, have we reestablished that industrial base that allows us to produce those things that are coming from China mainland and Taiwan that we're going to have access cut off to?
So really, you think it's a fait accompli? They're going to take it?
Absolutely. We don't have enough time to get forces. By the time we would move forces in the region, they'll have it under control.
What if we make Taiwan a porcupine that it's almost impossible to take because they're armed so much, nuclear weapons aside?
What you're talking about, I think, is putting American troops back on Taiwan. Yeah, I think putting American troops and putting nuclear weapons on Taiwan and making China aware that, an attack on Taiwan would be met with massive retaliation like we did for Western Europe and the Soviet Union. Yeah, that would prevent war. All else, I think you're looking at war coming. It's just a matter of time.
Right now that we do have their chips there, and they have ordered a lot of weapons. So it should, when China sees the trouble Russia's having in Ukraine, does that make them think twice?
No, not at all. I mean, the level of force is just, Brian, the number of weapons that they've stockpiled on their side of the strait. They can make Taiwan look like the surface of the moon and only have used a fraction of the weapons that they have been storing weapons on their side of the strait for the last 30 years. And, we've been spending all of our weapons, whether it's Iraq or Afghanistan or Ukraine. They have been storing them up, and they're just, 100 miles off the coast. So they're just going to let fly when they do. And quite frankly, they don't care about the people. They just care about the territory. So, no, I think they have so much weaponry stacked up. It's just crazy.
What about world isolation in response?
They don't care. The Chinese don't care. I mean, they've been planning for this. That's why she tore up the agreement that Lighthizer and Liu He came to during the first year of the Trump administration. They're like, okay, we're not gonna play that game. And so they've been preparing for these tariffs and decoupling, and they're more self-deterred because of trade more than anything on Taiwan. But eventually they're just going to say, and this might be the thing that, these tariffs might be the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of just making them make the decision.
And then we'll have a huge decision to make. But according to you, General, where it's going to be so quick, it's not even going to be a decision.
It really is. I mean, I think when you get into the numbers, and we know the numbers, they're just, oh my God, overwhelming.
Wow. General, thanks so much. Appreciate your expertise.